diaphragm through another gate, that is, our role has become complementary to these two persons, hepatologist and interventional radiologist. And there are number of situations where we are really required on the front line. So I feel there is a good challenge and there is a good work as far as this area is concerned. Now, coming to the etiology of portal hypertension, this is a very commonly seen figure in the books. I am not going into the details of it. What I am going to focus is this area and pre-sinusoidal area, because that is more relevant to us as a pediatric surgeon. Now, coming to the certain applied anatomy situation, which is, I feel, essential in the management of portal hypertension as far as children are concerned. This is the portal circulation which extends from lower end of the esophagus to the mid-rectum. It is a very wide venous network with number of collaterals which are dormant otherwise when it is patent and functioning normally. What happens during a development of extrahepatic portal hypertension, this area gets blocked and the hypertension in this circuit is increased, and therefore the pressure, when it goes above 10 or up to 10, then the clinical symptoms of portal hypertension will start. So we have development of number of familiar sites of collateral circulation, out of which the one which is important over here will be having 4 zones, that is the gastric zone, palisade zone, perforating zone, and the truncal zone, out of which the perforating branch is the most, or the branches which are extremely important as far as bleeding is concerned. Secondly, I would like to focus your attention to this area where there is development of natural portosystemic shunt. This is the nature's response to develop or decrease the pressure. So what it results into, 2 important physiological changes, that is plasma volume expansion and hyperdynamic circulation. The point I would like to emphasize here is this results into a tremendous reservoir of system. So very overzealous replacement of blood, plasma, platelets, etc. can be detrimental to one's ultimate outcome. So next aspect into the collateral circulation is that thrombosis of the portal vein is very commonly seen, that is in the 70% of the situation. Portal vein along with the superior mesenteric circuit, which is seen in 15% of the cases, along with the splenic vein and the thrombosed portal vein will be seen 5%, and all the 3, if they are thrombosed, will be seen in 5% of the cases. It means we are dealing most of the time with thrombosed portal vein. We have got patent superior mesenteric venous system which is there. We have got left gastric vein draining here into the splenic vein, and we can easily establish the shunt to decompress the portal system. The point I want to emphasize here is that even if you can do, if you are not trained or unable to do shunt surgery, but just because you can do splenectomy, only splenectomy one should not do, because you will lose the golden opportunity when you refer this case to some other center, as the splenic vein will get thrombosed. Otherwise, it can construct a very nice proximal splenorenal shunt. So that is the point on this slide I wanted to emphasize. Now coming to a very important area which is not very focused as far as extrahepatic portal hypertension is concerned, and it is extremely important sequela of portal hypertension, what is known as biliopathy. Biliopathy or portal cavernous cholangiopathy, what it means, it is the affection of intra as well as extrahepatic biliary tree as a result of compression of pressure in the collaterals, or the ischemic changes which are occurring as a result of certain collaterals which are known as SENTS collateral, epilocal collateral, or paracollateral collaterals. So this will result into various indentations, angulations, scarring, or stone formation, and thus resulting into jaundice, pruritus, abdominal pain. Another area which I want to focus your attention is that just see the cross section of this choledochal collaterals. This is a paracholedochal, this is epicholedochal, and there is also intracholedochal collateral there. So whenever endoscopist tries to put stent for stones or cholangitis or cholestatic jaundice with which this patient come, and if he tries to sweep this area, a torrential bleeding can occur because there is a possibility of intracholedochal collateral as well. Now coming to another newer and more popularity gaining concept of Rex races, it is the first portal from where the placental oxygenated blood enter into the systemic circulation of fetus through ductus venosus. And as the portal venous system develops, this races remains patent throughout the life. And we surgeons, as we keep on searching the horizons, and we have found out in the recent years, this can be used for the shunt. This is the retrograde photography, which gives us information on intrahepatic portal circulation. It's a gold standard. We need to have this before embarking upon this surgery. This races or venous tissue, which is there, it is vertically disposed, contrary to our expectation that this free ligament, round ligament of liver which comes here, that is the obliterated umbilical artery, but it is disposed vertically, and there are communications from left lobe of the liver, segment 2, 3 and caudate lobe. So they have to be controlled, they have not to be ligated, they have to be just controlled while constructing the shunt, and such either autologous or synthetic graft is mounted there. So this is the rec shunt. So this is about the applied anatomy, which I thought would be relevant as far as management is concerned. Now coming to the clinical presentation, usually you don't see any major bleeding in the first 5 years of life. Occasionally they will be having, but that is not the presentation. The common presentation in this age group is very non-specific. You would be seeing a child with fever, you will be seeing child with dehydration, child will be irritable, child will be poking somewhere in the abdomen, and therefore ultrasound thrombosis is noted. However, more than 70% patients who are older children would be bleeding by the end of first decade. There would be massive bleeding, there would be recurrent bleeding, but generally after major bleed, they will settle down because liver is normal, and there could be a long quiescent period. So we have got presentation with the bleeding episode, that is upper and lower GI, major bleeds, recurrent small bleeds. Not to forget that menorrhagia in young females is extremely important. Sometimes superficial bleeds like ecchymotic patches due to hypersplenism and thrombocytopenia. These are due to presentations due to bleeding. But what is now important are next 5-6 causes or situations where the cases are referred to us. Number one is anemia evaluation with plus minus splenomegaly and peripheral smears finding, evaluation of abdominal pain, failure to thrive, incidental ultrasound finding, jaundice, cholangitis pruritus indicative of biliopathy, evaluation of ascites, and along with other conditions. These last two conditions are not very commonly seen, but we need to keep in our mind. Now, when it comes to patient evaluation, these four investigations are so oftenly done, like in the beginning of evaluation, during the operation, and the post-operative phase, in the follow-up period, etc. So these are extremely important. I will just focus on each point which is very relevant. Particularly hypersplenism. Usually you will get a case where platelet count is 50,000 or much less. The point I would like to emphasize here is there is usually hardly ever there is a need for platelet transfusion. Generally, case should not be unnecessarily postponed or cancelled as the platelets are not available. So this hypersplenism very well tolerated, thrombocytopenia is very well tolerated by the children because they are functionally normal and they are used to it. Undoubtedly with hypopancreatitis, biliopathy comes in. And here, if we see changes in the liver function test, particularly 2 times increase in GGT, is an indicator that we must think actively and consider surgical intervention in this situation. Repeated blood transfusion can lead to ultimately viral hepatitis and cirrhosis over a period of time. Due to loss of hepatotrophic factors, coagulation profile is disturbed. INR up to 1.4, 1.5 is not uncommon, and that is not a contraindication for surgery. That is what I want to focus. Ultrasound, color Doppler is just such a wonderful investigation which is used very uniformly. Similarly, endoscopy, where variceal extent, presence, size, location, risk factors, etc. are noted. Then now subsequent investigation like liver biopsy is to be done in a very selected situation in the present context. That is whenever there is abnormality of LFT. As I told you earlier, it could be say pre-sinusoidal intrahepatic cause, or when it's dealing with the biliopathy, it could be early biliary cirrhosis, or one would be dealing with cirrhosis. patent splenoportal axis. It indicates that the block is in the hepatic region, pre-sinusoidal, sinusoidal, or post-sinusoidal. Therefore, when these two conditions are there, it is worthwhile considering liver biopsy. These investigations are extremely specialized investigations. These are to be planned along with the radiologist, surgeon, and the hepatologist. If they are done independently, likely to provide inadequate information, the repetition of investigation. These are very costly investigations. You need expertise. CT, MR, photography, both are very good. But what is most important from surgeon's point of view, which person or which your setting can give you good reconstructed image. If CT person can give you, you can do CT photography. If MR person can give you, you can give MR photography. Second important area is wage hepatic pressure gradient and wage hepatic portal venography, which is again extremely important from ruling out cirrhosis and planning for rection. Then coming endo ultrasound and ERCP, particularly for biliopathy, because they would be seeing if there is any intracholedocal collateral and accordingly will plan their procedure. Now coming to the management, this is where every one of us as a surgeon, though we are not getting opportunity to indulge because mostly looked after by intensivists and hepatologists these days, but we may be able to manage these cases at our level. I must focus here stabilization, evaluation, and treatment, which will go hand in hand. And you can see here splenectomy and devascularization and shunts. Surgery has relegated to a lower place, but there will be occasional situation there will be surgery needed. Just a word about this very important gadget. It is not an archival balloon tamponade. It will be very helpful in transferring patient from periphery to the specialized center for mere saving of the life, or within the tertiary center, if acts as a sort of a bridging time between endotherapy and pharmacotherapy. A caveat here is, if you use it very judiciously and properly, it is life-saving. But if you sort of not used it properly, it could be life-threatening as well. So this point must be kept in mind. Now, once the acute management is over, what is come or what is in the parlance of portal hypertension is talked as secondary prophylaxis, the prevention of second bleeding. So we have got several options for that, and what is our goal in that? Prevention of rebleeding, and a very important aspect of quality of life which is usually neglected on all these fronts, and prevention of OPSI by following this very carefully. Now, before going into this, there is a general misconception that if the portal hypertension is stabilized by endotherapy, there is no bleeding, the varices have disappeared, or by conservative management, patient is not bleeding, just continue like that, and as the patient grows, child will grow out of portal hypertension. I just want to demystify this misconception, and just coming to this area, what are the changes as a result of portal hypertension likely to occur? Recurrent bleed, multiple transfusion, acquiring blood transfusion related diseases, not getting safe blood, etc. is important. Problems of hypersplenism, quality of life, failure to thrive, and portal biliopathy, which is very, very common. If you see radiologically, almost 80 to 100% biliopathy is there, but symptomatic biliopathy in children is present up to 6 to 10%, and in the young adults, it is present up to 40-50%. That is what I was told about this. Now, seeing the changes in the liver as the hepatotrophic factors are less, you have got impaired liver growth and coagulation abnormalities like INR, and ultimately with biliopathy, it will lead to the biliary cirrhosis. Another important area, as I said, nature's way of developing natural porta-systemic shunts will lead to bypassage of this ammonia, which is a cerebral enterotoxin, and would lead to the minimal hepatic encephalopathy. There are controversial reports, but there are people who believe in this, and therefore, this sequelae of extrahepatic portal hypertension are always there unless it is decompressed very well. Therefore, in the natural history of extrahepatic portal hypertension, it will never outgrow, a child will never outgrow of it. You will have to do something to decompress the child. Now coming to the management options, we have got plethora of management options today: pharmacotherapy, endoscopic therapy, interventional radiology and imaging, and surgical intervention. These first three I am not going to focus. Obviously, my focus would be on surgical intervention. Surgical interventions, we have got shunts, we have got non-shunt procedure. Again, this I will Just for the reference, I will mention that the liver transplant, who can better comment on this than our chairperson. Therefore, I will leave it to him, role of liver transplant in portal hypertension. Now, coming to most important question, which is sort of troubling you, how to decide regarding the management approach. It has to be individualized, and another important thing is it has to be a long-term follow-up, which is mandatory. In between, we have got age. This is important because I already told in the first 4-5 years there will not be bleeding. So you have to very carefully observe this child, counsel the family well. Another important point here is I must focus or give few words about congenital portosystemic shunt, which are usually incidentally noted or antenatally noted, or some cholestasis jaundice for which it is noted. Usually they will disappear by 2 years. Surgeons have got really very minimal role. Interventional radiologists nowadays have taken over it. The important point is that cardio and neuro manifestations in a child who is not having any explainable cause, it is always better to think of congenital portosystemic shunt. So therefore, age is important. The type of portal hypertension, whether you are dealing with intrahepatic or extrahepatic, obviously important. Intrahepatic, you would try to avoid surgical intervention as far as possible. Issues of large spleen cannot be underestimated, and therefore shunt has to be. For example, in this situation, you will need splenectomy, and when you do splenectomy, the best and the most commonly done shunt is the proximal splenorenal shunt. Here, perhaps side-to-side lienorenal shunt will not be of any use. Then the bleeding source. Bleeding source is not only esophageal varices, they could be other from these three areas. In gastropathy and ectopic varices or enteropathy, where endoscope cannot reach, and you have to think of different management along with the pharmacotherapy. The vascular anatomy and feasibility of construction of shunt, again, is extremely important. You cannot think of shunt unless the veins are shuntable. Then, of course, compliance and geographical location as far as our country is concerned, where safe blood, repeated visit to the hospital, economics, etc., definitely will be of paramount importance. Expertise and available healthcare facility, I cannot speak more on this, and you can imagine those of you are doing these cases. And what is also important is the previous procedure. That is what I am saying. Suppose if you are located at the peripheral center, you can manage splenectomy, but you cannot manage further devascularization or shunt surgery. Better don't do that, because you are losing the golden opportunity of doing shunts in the future wherever you are sending. So patient can be easily stabilized and can be sent. Now coming to the shunts, where you are most probably eagerly waiting for, as I got the feeding from many students, and I will focus more area on this. So if we divide shunts, we have got physiologic shunt, what is known as a Rex shunt or Rex bypass or mesoportal bypass. Actually, it is not a shunt, it is a portal reperfusion procedure, and which is of late coming up, and what is known as the physiologic shunt, because it will cure the portal hypertension. Now we have got non-physiologic shunt. We were all very familiar to all these total and partial shunts with portacaval, side-to-side, synthetic grafts. All these things have become now archival situation. Therefore, again, I will not focus. Selective shunt and non-selective shunt, out of which selective is distal splenorenal shunt. Again, it has got very limited application as far as pediatric is concerned. Therefore, again, I will go and I will come to the more focused area where our children will require, and we need to do our expertise in this area, are non-selective shunts. Non-selective shunts are essentially total shunts, because entire blood will be diverted from the esophagus. The total and the partial meaning when the blood is transported, that is the portal circulation is away from the liver in entirety. So proximal splenorenal shunt or central renal shunt, side-to-side lienorenal shunt, and mesocaval shunt. Now coming to other miscellaneous shunts, where these are known as when any vein collateral from the portal system you are hooking on to the systemic, or left gastric vein to systemic, or gastroportal Chinese shunt, these are there. And just to mention and complete the list, sometimes ascites, peritoneal venous shunt, nobody does in this era, but for the completion of this list. So what is shown here in the yellow color are the most frequently, as a pediatric surgeon, we will need to be master technique. In general, if you want to develop this area, you have to have in your armamentarium everything, so that you can fall upon different situation what you encounter. So now coming to proximal splenorenal shunt, it's splenectomy. Incision can be transverse, midline, rooftop. In this situation, I have given thoracoabdominal because very large spleen, in-depth area, So the lateral collateral circulation can be tackled very well. Isolation of splenic artery first, tackling it, ligating it so that the spleen size goes down. You can deliver. And this is the tail of pancreas. You go into the hilum and dissect out Y-shaped fork of splenic vein once the spleen is out and ligate these two. Try to avoid handling of this main stump of splenic vein because thrombosis as a result of intimal injury can occur. Then harvesting of the renal vein after tackling retroperitoneal lymph node. Then very nice lie there and you are doing this oblique shunt with a natural lie. This is one case. This is another case where while doing shunt, we are retracting all these organs. When they fall back, when you close the abdomen, there is a possibility of developing kink here or a distortion of the shunt. So you have to really manage which is the toe end and the heel end of the thing by giving the marker stitch here. And this cannot be underestimated. And at the end, you take always liver biopsy to document and for the future purpose. So now you will be wondering what are the indications when there are issues of large spleen that can be resolved. Effective total portal decompression is possible and there is very good catch-up growth after this surgery. Rather than disadvantages, I would put the correct word limitations because it is technically difficult and angulation and kinking of the anastomosis is possible. And what is the appropriate case? A very large spleen with hypersplenism, failure to thrive and splenic vein more than 5 millimeters. So this is the situation for this. Another very common shunt, side-to-side lienorenal shunt, also rechristened as Mitra shunt, as an excellent contribution from Professor S.K. Mitra of PGI Chandigarh. This is the rooftop in C. Splenic vein is diagonal pancreatic vein. You have to tackle the collaterals from there. This is the renal vein. And imagine this distance. If distance is very large and it is not possible, this shunt will be difficult. You may have to convert this shunt into end to side. And sometimes here you can consider of distal splenorenal shunt or splenectomy and this shunt. And this is how it is brought together. It's a very risky situation here if it slips here. And this is the shunt which is created there. So now, when you will consider side-to-side lienorenal shunt, it permits larger diameter, even a small vein. So it is possible to do in a smaller child. Lesser risk of angulation and kinking because vein is fixed on either side. So chances are less when the all viscera falls back into the abdomen and it preserves spleen. It is to be done when there is mild splenomegaly and mild hypersplenism. Massive splenomegaly and severe hypersplenism and wide separation between splenic vein and renal vein are relative limitations for this. The ideal situation would be absence of massive splenomegaly and hypersplenism, small diameter of the splenic vein, and you need to construct shunt where it is less than 5 millimeters. Now coming to the mesocaval shunt, this is the autologous jump graft here. There is other way of doing is hooking the inferior vena cava onto it. I am not going to talk about it because of its limitations and nobody is practicing. This is being practiced by some people. Now what are the advantages of this? It's a lesser risk of angulation again because two fixed point SMV and IVC, spleen preserving shunt, and what is more important is that it is a rescue shunt procedure when one has done already some other shunt procedure or one has already attempted devascularization and patient has come to you now and SMV is patented. So that is the time where you can construct this shunt. Limitation, of course, people raise the question mark how effectively it will decompress portal shunt and the shunt thrombosis, particularly when you use synthetic graft like Vertex. Autologous grafts are less thrombosis prone. So appropriate case, large spleen, good diameter of SMV. Now coming to the more important area, rec shunt. This is a round ligament or ligamentum teres, which is going there. Here when it comes, we have dissected out recess rex, and you see here sutures are given on the feeding vessels from say segment 2, 3 and 4, which are to be preserved. They are not ligated. They are just to prevent bleeding during shunt. They are sluggard is applied there. So this is the left internal jugular vein which is harvested. This is the superior mesenteric vein just right of the vertebral column. Below the inferior margin of the duodenum is dissected. And here you have created transmesocolic, retropancreatic, pre-pyloric, retropyloric, pre-pancreatic, a shunt passage or a canal or a tunnel. And here that graft is placed and you are doing anastomosis on the superior mesenteric side after completing anastomosis here. So this is the Rex shunt. What are the advantages? A portal reperfusion procedure, hence curative. It corrects INR, it reverses minimal encephalopathy and enhances liver and somatic growth. So therefore it is curative. But what are the limitations? You need very favorable anatomy, which is not quite common to get favorable anatomy. I will not go into the detail. It itself is a one more big lecture. It is technically demanding. You need expert imaging radiology backup services because you need to have that gold standard study in the post-operative period. If shunt get blocked, you need to have this person to dilate your shunt and study your shunt and give correct information. What is the appropriate scenario where you would consider patent left portal vein and SMV and as a primary prophylaxis? This is a very interesting thing which has come up. Any surgery which has been recommended in the Baveno 6 recommendation, which was conducted in 216, which has reported as primary prophylaxis better than any other therapy like pharmacotherapy or endotherapy. That is a point, and that is a very, I would say, a joyful outcome of the study, and we should be very happy about it as a pediatric surgeon. Now, a word about non-shunt ablative or devascularization procedures. These, as far as possible, these are to be avoided. The procedure which is done these days is modified Seguera procedure, that is extensive trans-abdominal esophagogastric devascularization with splenectomy. You do very meticulous esophagogastric region devascularization up to the inferior pulmonary vein and entire lesser greater curvature to the extent that people say that you should see dusty stomach. That is the end of it. As far as possible, this is to be avoided, and when it is needed, particularly in emergency situation where you are lost to any other option, it can be considered. Other options are there. They are not routinely practiced. Some centers still practice, but they are just for the sake of mentioning to you here. I will not focus onto it much more. Now, what take-home message after all this? I have told you all applied anatomy, indications, situations, when to select, what are the advantages, disadvantages. So just keep in mind that if you have got progressive hepatic dysfunction, like in our situation, biliary atresia, hepatic parenchymal diseases, or venous outflow obstruction, you would not consider surgery as far as possible, and most of the time it will not be feasible. But if you can see here, we have got reasonably good list of indications which are there. I would like to focus your attention here, these conditions, particularly in young women or in congenital child, where splenoportal axis is patent. It is technically demanding, but extremely effective surgery. Even in a child's A criteria who is well stabilized, who is compliant, and there is non-cholestatic cirrhotic situation, you can still consider shunt there. And of course, portal biliopathy. Portal biliopathy develops symptoms and signs by the time irreversible damage has already occurred. That is why I told you the importance of liver, deranged liver function test with raised GGT level more than 2 times in an asymptomatic child in a setting of extrahepatic venous obstruction, and it has gone for a long duration. You have to consider surgical intervention. So we have got a tremendous role here to play. Now coming to another take-home message, current status that we are complementing in a multidisciplinary system, and we should try to develop center of excellence where in your own locality, by giving your good results and forming good teams, you can invite more patients to your center. Of course, it depends on the anatomical availability, patency and size of veins, splenic size and expertise. Splenectomy and proximal renal shunt is very effective and very suitable in our scenario. Modified Seguera procedure is very handy, particularly in desperate situations. And Rex bypass is the most physiological curative treatment recommended for even primary prophylaxis. And the last one, very important, I want you to not forget venovenous anastomosis, which is very precious and it's a very well-honed art. You have to spend years together to develop this art. And if you master this art, you can have a number of applications into other areas of pediatric surgery. And therefore, I feel we can give really rainbow of hope to these children. And I rest here my talk and keep open to chairperson's comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Raju. That was excellently covered. You've touched on every aspect of the topic, so I won't spend time in trying to summarize that. I'd like to quickly go to one or two questions that have come up, which are on the chat group here, and which raise important points. The issue of splenectomy. When do you think it is definitely mandatory to do a splenectomy and not a distal splenorenal shunt? So that means the spleen can be preserved.
Okay. I would say in practice, most of the time when we get such patients, they are given prolonged endotherapy treatment. By the time they come to us, usually splenomegaly will be massive. Secondly, it will be associated with hypersplenism. So this area is difficult technically constructing DSRS. This will not revert your hypersplenism. Secondly, it is a very selective shunt. It will result into decompression of esophagogastric splenic circuit, whereas the superior mesenteric circuit, portal circuit, which will remain aside. So that will result into a portal biliopathy without any doubt, because that area is not getting decompressed. Then it is too much hyped that it is a very selective shunt. It loses its selectivity as the time passes off as a result of pancreatic siphon effect.
So you are suggesting
size of the vein usually.
So you are suggesting that if the spleen is very large and if there's evidence of hypersplenism, it is preferable to remove it and create a central shunt. Yes?
Exactly.
That is more practical also for our country and for most of our operating audience. Yeah. The next one, which is...
It will be one time and very effective.
Yes. Do you use anticoagulation after your shunt surgeries?
Yeah, good question. Again, there is a controversy. Different centers follow different things. I am trained in PGI. I follow the same pattern. I am trained with Professor Ashley also, who used to follow same pattern. So what we do is intraoperative heparin, 100 international unit per kg, when we just start clamping of the renal and splenic vein. In the post-operative period, we give 100 international unit of this crystalline heparin subcutaneously 8 hourly till 7 to 10 days. So this is what I follow. There are centers, particularly in Chicago, where they would do, after this initial anticoagulation, follow with antiplatelet agent for another 6 months. Some of them they use even 2 antiplatelet agents along with aspirin and another drug. And there are centers like All India Institute, Delhi, they don't use any anticoagulation. So there are split opinion on this.
But I suppose it is preferable. I suppose it is preferable to use anticoagulation. Yeah. I'd like to just conclude, because we are overrun by about 8 to 10 minutes, just by making 3 points or stressing 3 points that Dr. Savji made. And one is that you have to look out for portobiliopathy. It's a more recognized complication nowadays, and it needs to be addressed. And we have to our armamentarium the REX shunt. If it is possible, I think it should be done as far as possible. That's one thing. The other is that he stressed in his talk was failure to thrive is an important indication nowadays. So in the past, we used to say if the patient is not bleeding, nothing is happening, we can continue with conservative treatment and not worry too much. I think we miss out on the development of the child, cognitive improvement, and very, very incipient, perhaps, encephalopathy. We might not be able to judge it, but over time. So creating a proper decompression, I think, benefits those children. Lastly, since he asked me about transplant, it is only applicable in cirrhotic conditions where there is, bleeding which is uncontrolled. And this is in our biliary atresia group of patients where ultimately, rather than do multiple steps of sclerotherapy or banding or any other shunt procedure, a transplant might be the only option. So with these few, if there are any questions that are burning questions, one question can be allowed from the coordinators. If you have something that I have not seen on the chat.
No, sir. Thank you so much. I thank Dr. Sauji sir for such an excellent and elaborate and informative talk. And I thank also Dr. Ashley D. Cruz sir for chairing the session. And with that, we'll move on to the next session. The speakers will be introduced by Dr. Yogesh.
So thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
my pleasure and privilege.
With this, we move to the